Hi, this is Mahavan Das. Welcome to Simple Gita, Chapter 18, Part 2. This chapter is entitled The Perfection of Renunciation, and this is our final class in the Simple Gita course, a class in which we hear the essence of the Bhagavad Gita and its conclusion. Let's have a short overview of the second part of this chapter. In part 2 of this chapter, we hear Krishna explain how one can be elevated through following occupational duties prescribed in authorised yoga wisdom. He then describes knowledge of the impersonal Brahman Platform, the perfect stage of the renounced order of life, and the process for attaining this stage. We also hear how to go from impersonal spiritual realisation to personal spiritual realisation, by which one can know Krishna and attain his abode. Krishna then explains pure bhakti yoga, acting in Krishna consciousness. We hear about the results of working and not working in Krishna consciousness, approaching the Supersoul, and then approaching Lord Krishna, the Supreme Person. Finally, we hear the glories of studying and teaching Bhagavad Gita, the realisations of Arjuna after hearing it, Sanjaya's own experience in this regard, and his conclusion that wherever Krishna and Arjuna are, there will certainly be opulence, victory, extraordinary power, and morality. Let's go over the key points for this final section of the Bhagavad Gita. From text 41, we hear about elevation through prescribed material duties. We've heard in the 4th chapter about the 4 occupational divisions of society, and that they work according to the qualities that they've acquired from karma. Everybody has a material body and mind, which is the result of karma, or material activities in the previous life. And that body is a combination of various qualities. So according to those material qualities that the body is constituted of, one will have a natural inclination towards a particular occupation. So here in this final section of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains those 4 divisions, those 4 occupational divisions of society as Brahmanas. That means intellectuals, educators, etc., who have a nature in the mode of goodness. And then Kshatriyas, administrators, military persons, who have a nature in the mode of passion. Vaishyas, farmers and business persons, their nature is born of passion and ignorance. And finally, Shudras, labourers and artisans, etc., who have a nature from the mode of ignorance. So human society is often compared to the human body in yoga wisdom. We have the term the social body, and in yoga wisdom we often compare society to the human body and divide it up into 4 parts, which represent the 4 occupational divisions. So there's the head, the arms, the belly, and the legs. The head correlates to the Brahmanas, the arms to the Kshatriyas, the belly to the Vaishyas, and the legs to the Shudras. So all parts of the body, just as in the human body, are important and necessary for the body to run smoothly and achieve its goals, and it's the same in human society. Now, although we may think one part of society or one part of the body is more advantageous than another, in the context of spiritual life, Krishna explains here that all the parts of the social body can become perfect by performing their specific occupational duties as a sacrifice for the Supreme. That means to perform duties and give the result. Remember, we heard about that at the beginning of this chapter. That's called tyaga, or renunciation, renouncing the fruits or the results of one's activities, to the Supreme. Now that process is called karma yoga, and it's been explained extensively in this Bhagavad Gita in the 3rd chapter, the 5th chapter, and at the beginning of this chapter as well. So all the parts of the social body can become perfect by performing their specific duties as given in yoga wisdom as a sacrifice for the Supreme. Krishna explains the importance of sticking to one's own duty, not trying to perform the duty of somebody else. Arjuna wanted to give up his duty as a Kshatriya, the duty of fighting in this battle and protecting the citizens. And instead he wanted to take up the position of a Brahmana. He thought that that would be a better occupation for him, and in this way he would avoid the crisis at hand. But as we'll hear later in this chapter, Krishna points out to him that because he has the nature of a military person, he's a passionate person, meaning his nature is born of the mode of passion, therefore he's always going to act that way. Even if he goes to the forest and tries to take up the occupation of a Brahmana, a peaceful Brahmana learning and teaching in the forest, he would actually end up fighting even in the forest, because that's his nature. That's the type of work born of his nature or born of his material body. Remember, we also heard about this at the beginning of the 3rd chapter, that everyone has a nature born of the 3 modes, and everyone is actually forced by that nature to act according to the modes they've acquired and perform the kind of work that those modes dictate. So Srila Prabhupada gives a nice conclusion here to this point. He says, one's occupational duty is prescribed in Bhagavad Gita. As already discussed in previous verses, the duties of the Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra are prescribed according to their particular modes of nature. One should not imitate another's duty. A man who is by nature attracted to the kind of work done by Shudras should not artificially claim to be a Brahmana, although he may have been born into a Brahmana family. So this is a common misconception in India, even today, that if I'm born in a particular family with a certain heritage of a certain kind of occupation, then I'm automatically qualified for that occupation. So that's not the case. It's a common misconception. One actually has to have the qualities, as Krishna said in the 4th chapter, guna, to perform the karma, the work associated with any of the occupations. And of course, one also has to take training from qualified persons in that occupation as well to become qualified. So it's not simply that I'm born in a certain situation that automatically qualifies me for a certain occupation. Srila Prabhupada goes on to say, in this way one should work according to his own nature. No work is abominable if performed in the service of the Supreme Lord. Every man should work for the purpose of yajna, or for Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Anything done for personal sense gratification is a cause of bondage. The conclusion is that everyone should be engaged according to the particular mode of nature he has acquired, and he should decide to work only to serve the supreme cause of the Supreme Lord. The next key point we get here is the Brahman Platform. What is the Brahman Platform? The Brahman Platform is the platform of impersonal spiritual realization. You may remember at the end of the 14th chapter, Krishna explained that he's the basis of that realization, of that impersonal spiritual realization. He's the basis of the Brahman Platform, meaning his personality is the basis of it. So coming to this platform of realization involves processes we've heard about in many other chapters. Becoming purified by intelligence, controlling the mind with determination, giving up the objects of sense gratification, living in a secluded place, eating little, controlling the body, mind, and power of speech, being free from false ego, etc. This is the process of jnana yoga, which is part of the indirect path that leads to the goal of yoga, which is bhakti. So next, Krishna explains how to go from this impersonal realization to personal realization, by which one can know Krishna and attain his abode. He says, one who is thus transcendentally situated at once realizes the Supreme Brahman and becomes fully joyful. He never laments or desires to have anything. He is equally disposed toward every living entity. In that state, he attains pure devotional service unto me. And in his purport, Srila Prabhupada explains, to the impersonalist, achieving the Brahmabhuta stage, that's the Sanskrit term for this impersonal spiritual realization, becoming one with the Absolute is the last word. But for the personalist or pure devotee, one has to go still further to become engaged in pure devotional service. This means that one who is engaged in pure devotional service to the Supreme Lord is already in a state of liberation called Brahmabhuta, oneness with the Absolute. Without being one with the Supreme, the Absolute, one cannot render service unto him. In the Absolute conception, there is no difference between the served and the servitor, yet the distinction is there in a higher spiritual sense. So, for an impersonalist, liberation, freedom from the cycle of repeated birth and death and becoming one with the Supreme, is the highest perfection, but not for the bhakti yogi. Because in that state, there's no conception of service to the Supreme. Bhakti means love, and love means an exchange of affection which is shown through service. In other words, offering service is the practical demonstration of love. Therefore, this impersonal realization in which there's no conception of service to the Supreme is never aspired for by a bhakti yogi. Next, Krishna makes an essential statement. He gives the exclusive process for understanding and attaining him in his personal feature. He says, one can understand me as I am, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, only by devotional service. And when one is in full consciousness of me by such devotion, he can enter into the kingdom of God. Now, initially this might sound something like a dogmatic statement. Is this the only way? But actually, it's not a dogmatic statement, it's just a personal statement. As we do, Krishna chooses to reveal himself only to those people who love and trust him. So when he says, only by bhakti can I be understood, he's just saying, only by love can I be understood. How does the process of bhakti work? Srila Prabhupada explains, after attainment of the Brahmabhuta stage of freedom from material conceptions, devotional service begins by one's hearing about the Lord. When one hears about the Supreme Lord, automatically the Brahmabhuta stage develops and material contamination and greediness and lust for sense enjoyment disappears. As lust and desires disappear from the heart of a devotee, he becomes more attached to the service of the Lord, and by such attachment, he becomes free from material contamination. In that state of life, he can understand the Supreme Lord. So this is how one can understand Krishna as the Supreme Person and go beyond this impersonal realization. By love, one can conquer Krishna, and he agrees to reveal himself to those that love him. And when one is in full Krishna consciousness by that revelation, then he can enter into the kingdom of God. In other words, then he becomes qualified to attain the personal association of the Supreme. The next section we get a description of pure bhakti yoga, acting in Krishna consciousness. Krishna explains that activities in bhakti lead to his abode by his grace, and therefore he recommends in all activities just depend upon me and work always under my protection. In such devotional service, be fully conscious of me. And he explains that the result of, in all activities, trying to be Krishna conscious, is that by his grace, one will pass over all the obstacles of conditioned life. However, for those who act out of false ego, they remain in the cycle of repeated birth and death. We also heard about that at the beginning of the 9th chapter. Those who act out of false ego are lost in the cycle of samsara. He explains here that Arjuna will act according to his nature as a military man in all circumstances. So the best course of action for him is to do that for Krishna here on the battlefield of Kurukshetra as karma yoga. Otherwise, the modes of material nature that constitute his body, they will force him to act all the same, but for the wrong reasons and with inauspicious consequences. Srila Prabhupada explains here, Arjuna was a military man and born of the nature of the Kshatriya. Therefore his natural duty was to fight. But due to false ego, he was fearing that by killing his teacher, grandfather and friends, he would incur sinful reactions. Actually, he was considering himself the master of his actions, as if he were directing the good and bad results of such work. He forgot that the Supreme Personality of Godhead was present there, instructing him to fight. That is the forgetfulness of the conditioned soul. The Supreme Personality gives directions as to what is good and what is bad, and one simply has to act in Krishna consciousness to attain the perfection of life. No one can ascertain his destiny as the Supreme Lord can. Therefore, the best course is to take direction from the Supreme Lord and act. One should act unhesitatingly to execute the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That will keep one safe under all circumstances. Next, we hear about approaching the Supersoul. We've heard about the Supersoul in various chapters, and Krishna's expansion as the Supersoul is present in the heart of every living entity and is aspired for by the practitioners of Ashtanga Yoga. This was especially mentioned in the 6th chapter. Bhakti yogis, however, approach Krishna directly, because Krishna is the source of the Supersoul, as he is also the source of the impersonal Brahman, the impersonal manifestation of the Supreme. So, after this presentation, Krishna then says to Arjuna, now that I've explained all this confidential knowledge to you, deliberate on it fully, and then do what you wish to do. In other words, Krishna never forces Arjuna to accept his good instructions. He never forces Arjuna to love him. He never forces anyone to love him. But rather, he gives Arjuna and us all the various options that we have and their respective consequences. And while encouraging us to make the best decision, ultimately asks us to act according to our own choice. Why does Krishna do that? Because without choice, there's no question of real love. Nobody wants forced love. And that is true with Krishna as well. He wants us to choose to love him because that is the best kind of love. What is the best choice we can make according to Krishna? He says to Arjuna, because you are my very dear friend, I'm speaking to you my supreme instruction, the most confidential knowledge of all. Hear this from me, for it is for your benefit. Always think of me, become my devotee, worship me, and offer your homage unto me. Thus you will come to me without fail. I promise you this because you are my very dear friend. So this is the essence of the Bhagavad Gita, bhakti, or devotion to Krishna. Srila Prabhupada explains here, the most confidential part of knowledge is that one should become a pure devotee of Krishna and always think of him and act for him. And the Lord's promise is that anyone who is in such pure Krishna consciousness will certainly return to the abode of Krishna, where he will be engaged in the association of Krishna face to face. This most confidential part of knowledge is spoken to Arjuna because he is the dear friend of Krishna. Everyone who follows the path of Arjuna can become a dear friend to Krishna and obtain the same perfection as Arjuna. These words stress that one should concentrate his mind upon Krishna, the very form with two hands carrying a flute, the bluish boy with a beautiful face and peacock feathers in his hair. One should fix his mind on this original form of Godhead, Krishna. Concentration of the mind on the form of Krishna constitutes the most confidential part of knowledge, and this is disclosed to Arjuna because Arjuna is the most dear friend of Krishna's. Next we get the conclusion of the Bhagavad Gita, surrender to Krishna. Krishna says, abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reactions. Do not fear. Srila Prabhupada explains here, the Lord has described various kinds of knowledge and processes of religion, knowledge of the Supreme Brahman, knowledge of the Supersoul, knowledge of the different types of orders and statuses of social life, knowledge of the renounced order of life, knowledge of non-attachment, sense and mind control, meditation, etc. He has described in so many ways different types of religion. Now, in summarizing Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that Arjuna should give up all the processes that have been explained to him. He should simply surrender to Krishna. That surrender will save him from all kinds of sinful reactions, for the Lord personally promises to protect him. Remember in the first chapter, Arjuna was very concerned about the negative karma he would accrue from killing so many people on the battlefield, particularly his superiors. Here, at the conclusion of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, don't worry, I'll personally protect you from all reactions. And he says, abandon all varieties of religion. This means that we should give up whatever we think should be done. And as he says here, surrender unto me, surrender unto Krishna, which simply means to do what Krishna wants us to do. Because Krishna has the ultimate perspective of past, present, and future. Krishna knows what is best for all living entities at all times and places. And if we simply follow that, then we act perfectly. Srila Prabhupada goes on to say, there are different processes of religion and purificatory processes by cultivation of knowledge, meditation in the mystic yoga system, etc. But one who surrenders unto Krishna does not have to execute so many methods. That simple surrender unto Krishna will save him from unnecessarily wasting time. One can thus make all progress at once and be freed from all sinful reactions. The particular words used here, ma shucha, don't fear, don't hesitate, don't worry, are very significant. One may be perplexed as to how one can give up all kinds of religious forms and simply surrender unto Krishna, but such worry is useless. Krishna is here stressing in his conclusion to the Gita the direct path recommended in Yoga Wisdom, which is Bhakti Yoga. That is the goal of all the other previously mentioned yogas and paths and methods. That's why he's saying, give up all those indirect methods and accept the direct method of simply doing what I say. That is perfect yoga. And in the final section of this chapter, which is the final section of the Gita, we hear about the glory of studying and teaching the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna explains that one who studies the Bhagavad Gita worships him by his intelligence. And he also explains that one who takes up the very difficult task of teaching the Bhagavad Gita as it is, attains pure bhakti and Krishna's abode, and becomes the most dear person to him in this world. Krishna finally asks his student Arjuna if he has understood the Gita and whether his crisis has been solved. Remember, the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is often referred to as the yoga of crisis. And what an incredible crisis Arjuna was in. So, as a good teacher, Krishna is asking Arjuna at the end of the lesson, have you learnt what you were supposed to learn? Have you assimilated the message? Is your problem now solved? Is your crisis now rectified? To which Arjuna replies, my dear Krishna, O infallible one, my illusion is now gone. I have regained my memory by your mercy. I am now firm and free from doubt, and am prepared to act according to your instructions. Srila Prabhupada explains here, the constitutional position of the living entity represented by Arjuna is that he has to act according to the order of the Supreme Lord. He is meant for self-discipline. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says that the actual position of the living entity is that of eternal servant of the Supreme Lord. Forgetting this principle, the living entity becomes conditioned by material nature, but in serving the Supreme Lord, he becomes the liberated servant of God. The living entity's constitutional position is to be a servitor. He has to serve either the illusory Maya or the Supreme Lord. If he serves the Supreme Lord, he is in his normal condition, but if he prefers to serve the illusory external energy, then certainly he will be in bondage. In illusion, the living entity is serving in this material world. He is bound by his lust and desires, yet he thinks of himself as the master of the world. This is called illusion. When a person is liberated, his illusion is over, and he voluntarily surrenders unto the Supreme to act according to his desires. This is a very interesting point that Srila Prabhupada points out here, is that although we don't usually think about it, we're actually always serving someone or something. What is the perfection of that propensity to serve? The perfection of that propensity to serve occurs when we focus it on the Supreme, on Krishna. Only that service, which is the practical demonstration of our love, can completely satisfy the heart. That is the conclusion of all yoga wisdom. Srila Prabhupada goes on to say, Krishna consciousness is acting according to Krishna's order. A conditioned soul, illusioned by the external energy of matter, does not know that the Supreme Lord is the Master, who is full of knowledge and who is the proprietor of everything. Whatever he desires, he can bestow upon his devotees. He is the friend of everyone, and he is especially inclined to his devotee. He is the controller of this material nature and of all living entities. He is also the controller of inexhaustible time, and he is full of all opulences and all potencies. The Supreme Personality of Godhead can even give himself to the devotee. One who does not know him is under the spell of illusion. He does not become a devotee, but a servitor of Maya. Remember, Maya means illusion. Arjuna, however, after hearing Bhagavad Gita from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, became free from all illusion. He could understand that Krishna was not only his friend, but the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he understood Krishna factually. So to study Bhagavad Gita is to understand Krishna factually. When a person is in full knowledge, he naturally surrenders to Krishna. When Arjuna understood that it was Krishna's plan to reduce the unnecessary increase of population, he agreed to fight according to Krishna's desire. He again took up his weapons, his arrows and bow, to fight under the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The purpose of the Bhagavad Gita is to free us from illusion, and the result of properly hearing the Bhagavad Gita is exactly that. We become free from illusion, as Arjuna did, and we follow Arjuna's example and act according to Krishna's instructions. So that is Bhakti Yoga. In the final verses, we get a Sanjaya's experience of hearing the Bhagavad Gita, which is quite extraordinary. He says, "Thus I have heard the conversation of the two great souls, Krishna and Arjuna, and so wonderful is that message that my hair is standing on end. By the mercy of Vyas, I have heard these most confidential talks directly from the master of all mysticism, Krishna, who is speaking personally to Arjuna. O King, as I repeatedly recall this wondrous and holy dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna, I take pleasure, being thrilled at every moment. O King, as I remember the wonderful form of Lord Krishna, I am struck with wonder more and more, and I rejoice again and again." He's having a powerful experience. And the final verse of the Bhagavad Gita, Sanjaya says, "Wherever there is Krishna, the master of all mystics, and wherever there is Arjuna, the supreme archer, there will also certainly be opulence, victory, extraordinary power, and morality." That is my opinion. So although Dhritarashtra, at the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, was hopeful of the victory of his sons, here in the conclusion of the Gita, Sanjaya gives his verdict in this last verse. The other party will be victorious due to the presence of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and his pure devotee Arjuna. So there we are at the conclusion of our Simple Gita course. I sincerely hope that you benefited from hearing the Bhagavad Gita, and it was a great delight for me to be able to present the Bhagavad Gita in this course. It certainly increased my understanding of the Gita and my appreciation for the inconceivable knowledge which Krishna imparts to Arjuna and to us. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you in future videos.